Close your eyes and drift back in time. It's not 100 years, not even 1,000, but 4,000 years ago. To a land where two mighty rivers flowed. This was the Indus Valley. A land of extremes, punishing summers where the heat shimmered across the flat plains, and of monsoons, sudden and unrelenting, when the skies opened and floods poured across the earth. It was here, along these rivers, that some of the world's first great cities rose. Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, dozens of others built of baked clay and stone. A civilization that thrived even though the land itself was as unforgiving as it was generous. Imagine. It is summer in the Indus Valley. The sun blazes in the sky, a burning white disk, unbroken by clouds. The ground is dry, cracked in places, the earth hardened by weeks of relentless heat. The people of the Indus knew this cycle well. Each year the heat would press down upon them. There was no glass, no fans, no hum of electricity to cool the body. Instead, homes were built of thick mud brick and clay, their walls designed to hold back some of the sun's fury. Doorways were narrow and windows small, not to let in light, but to keep it out. Inside, the air was still, but compared to the blazing streets outside, the shade brought relief. Children learned early to retreat into the coolest corners. Mothers drew water from the wells, sprinkling it across clay floors to release a cooling mist as it evaporated. The sound of insects filled the silence. Cicadas droning, bees moving lazily from flower to flower near the edges of fields. Oxen lay in the shade, oxen resting under trees, dogs stretched out on patches of dirt that had been wetted to fight the heat. Everywhere, life slowed. The Indus summer demanded patience. People rose early, when dawn was still cool, and they worked until the sun grew fierce, retreating in the middle of the day to rest before returning to their tasks as evening fell. It was a rhythm shaped not by choice, but by necessity. And then, as if nature itself had grown weary of the heat, the monsoon came. First came the clouds, dark, rolling, gathering on the horizon. The air grew heavy, and the earth seemed to hold its breath. Then, suddenly, rain. Sheets of water pouring from the heavens. Streets turned to streams. Clay houses were tested, their walls softening under the onslaught, rooftops dripping steadily into clay jars below. For some, it was a blessing. Fields that had lain dry and cracked were given life again. Crops drank deeply. Wells filled. Children laughed, splashing barefoot through the puddles. But for others, the monsoon brought disaster. The floods could rise quickly, sweeping through narrow streets. Homes nearest the rivers stood at risk. Stored grain could be ruined. Walls could collapse. To live in the Indus Valley was to live in balance, to respect both the gift of the rivers and their danger. Despite the heat and the floods, the Indus people built cities unlike any the world had seen before. Wide streets were laid out in careful patterns, straight, precise, and orderly. This was no accident. The cities were planned, designed with thought, perhaps even governed by unseen authorities who organized the building of entire neighborhoods. Homes were made of baked bricks, uniform in size, clay shaped and hardened in kilns, stacked neatly, forming walls that could endure years of weather. There were no grand palaces towering above the city, no single king's fortress, no massive statues of rulers. Instead, the city itself was the monument. Houses lined the streets, wells dotted the blocks, and everywhere there were drains and channels carrying water away. The people of the Indus valued cleanliness. Each home had its own washing area. Water was poured, used, and then guided out into the drains that lined the streets. An entire city that flowed with water, fresh drawn, used, and removed again. It was remarkable, and yet, life inside these streets was simple. Step into one of these narrow lanes. The ground is hard-packed dirt, swept clean by women in the morning. Walls rise on either side, blank clay faces, with only small openings for air. The lane is just wide enough for 2 oxen to pass, or for a cart to roll by slowly. Children run barefoot, their laughter echoing between the walls. Goats wander, nibbling at scraps of straw. A dog dozes near a doorway, ears twitching at the distant sounds of voices. From within the homes comes the soft rhythm of life, scrape of a stone grinder, as women crush grain into flour, the bubbling of a clay pot where lentils simmer slowly, the clink of beads, for the Indus people loved ornaments, bangles of shell, stone, or brightly polished metal. Merchants move through the lanes, carrying baskets of goods. Clay jars, woven mats, polished carnelian beads. They call softly to one another, exchanging greetings, trading news. At the heart of each neighborhood stands a well. Life revolves around these wells. Morning and evening, women gather with jars balanced on their hips. They wait their turn, filling pots, sharing words, watching children play nearby. The splash of water echoes down the well shafts, cool and deep. Without wells, there could be no city here. The rivers gave life, but it was the wells that sustained the people each day. And then, as the sun sank, the city transformed. The heat of the day lifted, little by little, the air cooled. Shadows stretched across the streets, and the city seemed to exhale. People climbed to the flat rooftops of their homes. Here, under the open sky, families gathered. They spread mats, sat together, shared the evening meal. Children listened as elders told stories of gods, of spirits, of ancestors. Voices were soft, hushed in the night air. Above them, the stars stretched wide. No smoke, no lamps, no haze, just endless constellations glittering across the sky. The same stars you see tonight, but brighter, sharper, unbroken. The hum of insects rose. A chorus of crickets, a buzz of wings near the lamps that burned oil and cast gentle light. Oxen shifted in the streets below, their bells tinkling softly. Dogs barked once, twice, and then settled again. The city was quieter at night, yet alive in a gentler way. Families drifting to sleep on the rooftops, cooled by breezes, guarded by stars. To live in the Indus Valley was never simple. It was to endure the punishing summer sun, to survive the floods of the monsoon, to build in clay and trust in the strength of brick, to share narrow streets with animals, neighbors, and strangers alike. But it was also to find beauty in the small moments, the cool of water drawn from a deep well, the quiet of the night sky spread endlessly above, the rhythm of grinding stone, of cooking fires, of stories told in the dark. It was life at its most fragile, and yet, life that endured for centuries. Close your eyes once again, let the noise of the present fade, and return to the streets of the Indus Valley. The sun has just risen, casting soft light over a city of clay and brick. It is the beginning of another day, a day much like those lived by countless families 4,000 years ago. The houses here are not grand, towering structures. They are simple and yet remarkably well designed. Most are built of baked mud brick, strong rectangular blocks, each one nearly identical in size. These bricks were made with care, pressed into molds, dried in the sun, or hardened in kilns. When stacked together, they created walls that could endure years of heat, rain, and wind. Step inside, and you find that the homes are often arranged around a small courtyard. This open space is the heart of the house. Here, light filters in. Here, families cook, work, and sit together. The rooms around the courtyard are small, cool, and plain. Some are for sleeping, others for storage. There are a few decorations on the walls, perhaps a painted design, or a shelf holding clay jars. Furnishings are minimal. A reed mat on the floor, a low platform for sitting, a clay lamp filled with oil, waiting to be lit at night. The roofs are flat, made of wooden beams covered in packed clay. At night, these roofs become bedrooms, dining halls, and resting places. In the cooler air of evening, families climb up ladders and gather under the stars. It is not luxury, but it is enough. Enough to shield from the sun, enough to keep the rain outside, enough to provide a place of safety, belonging, and rest. As dawn breaks, the homes of the city stir. A mother wakes first, rising quietly, her bare feet brushing the cool clay floor. She draws water from a jar left overnight, splashing her face, whispering a prayer to begin the day. Soon the house is alive with sound, the crack of grain being ground on stone slabs, the bubbling of lentils cooking in clay pots, the voices of children still heavy with sleep, rubbing their eyes as they wander to the courtyard. Breakfast is simple. Perhaps a flatbread made from wheat or barley, baked on a hot stone, a handful of dates, some fresh milk, drawn from the family's cow or goat. There is no rush, only the slow rhythm of life dictated by the sun. As the light strengthens, men prepare for their work. Some will go to the fields beyond the city walls, others to workshops where clay is shaped, beads are polished, or copper is hammered. Women tidy the home, tend to children, and prepare food for the day ahead. And always there is water. Water drawn, water carried, water poured. Life here revolves around it. Step outside, into the narrow street. There, at the corner, stands a well. Every neighborhood has one. It is the center of daily life, as important as any temple or market. The well is deep, lined with bricks that spiral downward, keeping the water pure. At dawn and dusk, women gather with clay jars balanced on their hips. They lower pots tied to ropes, the splash echoing as they strike the surface far below. They draw the water slowly, carefully, pulling hand over hand until the jars are full. There is chatter here, greetings exchanged, stories told, children playing, laughing as they chase one another around the well's edge. The water is precious. It will be used for cooking, for drinking, for bathing, even for washing away the dust of the streets, for the Indus people valued cleanliness deeply. From the well, narrow channels carry overflow water into the city's drains. And from there, out beyond the walls, keeping the streets fresh and free of waste. It is a system so advanced, so carefully made, that it will not be matched again for centuries in many parts of the world. As the morning grows, the narrow lanes of the city fill with sound, the lowing of oxen, pulling carts laden with grain, the bleating of goats herded toward the fields, the voices of merchants calling softly, offering baskets of vegetables or handfuls of sesame seeds. The air is thick with the smells of daily life, smoke from cooking fires, the sweetness of freshly baked bread, the sharpness of dung used as fuel, the earthy scent of wet clay as potters turn their wheels, shaping vessels for food and storage. Children weave between the animals and carts, darting into doorways, shouting to one another. Dogs wander freely, some well-fed, others thin and searching. Birds wheel overhead, circling above granaries and fields. It is not quiet, but it is not overwhelming either. The city hums with the rhythm of life, steady and enduring. Step back into a home at midday, and you will find its courtyard alive with activity. A woman sits cross-legged, turning a grinding stone, crushing grain into fine flour. Her arms move in steady rhythm, a movement she has done since childhood. Beside her, a child plays with a small clay toy, a cart with wheels, pulled by a string. Another woman kneads dough, pressing it flat, and places it on a hot stone to cook. The smell drifts upward, mingling with the smoke from the fire. In one corner, a man repairs a tool, sharpening a blade, binding a broken handle. Another child gathers dried dung, stacking it neatly, ready to be used as fuel. The courtyard is a place of togetherness. Work, play, conversation, all unfold here. And though the tasks are many, there is a gentleness in the rhythm. The pace of life is slow, deliberate, and unhurried. Water is not only for drinking, it is for washing, for purification, for comfort in the heat. Many homes have a small bathing area, a space lined with brick, sloped gently to carry away water. Here, in the heat of the day, a man pours water over his body, cooling himself. Children laugh as they splash one another, their giggles echoing down the lane. Women wash their hands and faces before preparing food. The water flows out through drains, carried away from the homes, keeping the city clean. It is a remarkable system, one that speaks to a people who valued hygiene, who saw water not only as survival, but as a gift of renewal. As the sun begins to fall, the city slows again. Shadows lengthen. Merchants return from the markets, farmers from the fields. The streets grow quieter, though still alive with voices. Inside homes, fires are lit, pots bubble with lentils, vegetables, or rice. The smell of spices drifts across courtyards. Perhaps cumin, perhaps coriander. Simple meals but nourishing, shared by all. And then, as the heat fades, families climb once again to their rooftops. The air is cooler here. The stars begin to appear, one by one. Children lie on mats, eyes wide, listening to stories. Tales of spirits, of the river, of animals that roam the forests. Parents speak softly, their voices blending with the hum of insects below. The day ends, not with noise, but with stillness. A whole city, hundreds of families, gathered beneath the same sky, resting together. The homes of the Indus were not palaces. They were not castles, nor fortresses. They were simple, functional, and enduring. The wells were not mere holes in the ground. They were the heart of the neighborhoods, the lifeblood of the city. The daily routines were not hurried or rushed. They were measured, steady, shaped by the rhythm of nature itself. It was a life lived in balance, between work and rest, between water and heat, between the bustle of the streets and the quiet of the rooftops. A life that endured for centuries, in cities that rose and flourished and left behind echoes we can still feel today. Imagine yourself wandering once more through the streets of an ancient city that has stood for centuries along the banks of the Indus River. The day has only just begun. The air is warm, the sky pale with morning light, and life is stirring behind clay walls. Inside each home, the rhythm of daily life unfolds. A mother rises early, stepping quietly across the cool clay floor. She kneels near a jar of water, scooping some into her hands, washing her face in silence. She whispers a prayer, perhaps to a spirit of the river, perhaps simply to welcome the day. Soon, the house begins to awaken. The courtyard fills with the scrape of stone on stone as grain is ground into flour. The sound is steady, patient, the same rhythm repeated across the city in every home, every morning. The smell of fresh bread begins to drift upward, baked on flat stones warmed by the fire. Children stir from sleep, rubbing their eyes, stretching, smiling as they catch sight of the food. Breakfast is simple. A small piece of bread, a handful of dates, a cup of milk drawn from the family's goat. It is enough to give strength for the day ahead. Step outside into the lane, and you will see others beginning their mornings too. Women carry clay jars balanced on their hips, moving toward the neighborhood well. Their bangles clink softly with each step. The air is alive with the sound of voices greeting one another, of children running ahead, of dogs barking in playful bursts. At the corner, the well stands waiting. Deep, dark, and cool, it holds the lifeblood of the city. One by one, ropes are lowered, clay pots sinking into the depths with a hollow splash. The women pull them back up, hand over hand, water dripping down the sides, glistening in the sunlight. They laugh, they talk, they share stories as they wait their turn. Children splash small cups of water over one another, squealing in delight. And when the jars are full, they lift them gracefully, balancing the heavy weight, and begin the slow walk home. Water is everywhere in this city. It flows from the wells into the houses. It runs along channels, carried away into the drains that line the streets. It cleanses, refreshes, and sustains. The Indus people cared deeply for water, not only for survival, but for comfort, for purity, for the feeling of coolness against the skin after a long, hot day. Now, step with me into one of the houses. Its doorway is narrow, its walls plain. Inside, it is cool and shaded, a refuge from the heat outside. The courtyard is bright, open to the sky. In one corner, a woman grinds spices, the warm scent of cumin filling the air. In another, a child shapes clay into a tiny toy cart, pressing wheels onto its sides. In a bathing room, lined with carefully laid bricks, a man pours water over himself, washing away the dust of the fields. The water trickles down into a drain, carried outside the house and into the city's channels. This is a place where even the simplest home is connected to the great rhythm of water that runs beneath the streets. The lanes outside grow busier as the sun rises higher. Merchants pass by, calling out softly, baskets on their shoulders. Some carry fresh vegetables, others beads carved from carnelian or shells polished smooth. Oxen pull carts of grain, their hooves thudding on the packed earth. Goats bleat, dogs dart between legs, children laugh and shout. The city hums with life, but it is not chaotic. It is steady, flowing, calm. Every sound belongs. Every action fits into the great rhythm of the day. And when the sun climbs too high, the pace slows. Families retreat into the shade of their homes. Courtyards are quiet except for the soft hiss of food, cooking, the murmur of voices, the distant hum of insects in the heat. Men rest on mats, children nap in corners, women sit together, weaving, repairing, talking softly. As the day fades, life begins to stir again. The streets fill once more with voices, footsteps, the lowing of cattle returning home. Fires are lit, pots bubble with lentils and rice, and the smell of evening meals drifts across the rooftops. And then the city climbs upward. One by one, families ascend to the roofs of their homes. They spread mats, sit together, and share food in the cool of the night. The heat of the day is gone, replaced by soft breezes. Above, the stars appear, countless and bright, stretching across the sky in a vast, endless river of light. Children lie back, gazing upward, eyes wide with wonder. Elders tell stories of the river, of animals, of gods whose names have long since been forgotten by time. The hum of crickets fills the silence between words. Dogs bark once, twice, then settle again. The city breathes quiet and at peace. Here, in these simple homes, life unfolds gently, steadily, day after day, year after year. It is not the life of kings and queens, not of palaces or battles. It is the life of ordinary people, grinding grain, drawing water, tending children, sharing stories beneath the stars, a life lived in balance with the rivers, with the seasons, with one another. And as sleep takes them, one by one, on rooftops beneath the open sky, the city itself seems to dream. Streets resting in silence, wells standing still and deep, homes glowing faintly with the last flickers of firelight. A whole civilization drifting gently into night. The Indus Valley city was not a place of grand towers or sprawling palaces. It was a place of neighborhoods, each one a world of its own. Imagine yourself walking slowly through one of these neighborhoods. The street beneath your feet is narrow, pressed earth-lined with baked bricks. The walls that rise around you are plain and windowless, giving no hint of the lives within. Yet behind each wall there is a family, and behind each door, a home filled with voices, tasks, laughter, and quiet rest. The houses are close together, side by side, sharing walls, sharing shade. From one roof to the next, families are neighbors not only in life but in sleep. At night, when they all climb to their rooftops, it is as if the entire block becomes a single open-air hall under the stars. Step inside one such house again. Notice the way the doorway leads not to a wide hall, but to a small passage, and then into the courtyard. This courtyard is alive with sunlight, even when the street outside is narrow and shaded. It is here that the home breathes. The air moves freely, carrying away the heat. The sky is always visible here, a square of blue by day, a square of black and silver at night. In the morning, the courtyard echoes with the scrape of grinding stones. Women press grain between two flat rocks, one heavy, one light, working it slowly until it becomes soft flour. The motion is repetitive, almost like a song sung with the body. It is patient work, and across the city, thousands of hands make the same rhythm each day. Beside them, small children play in the dust, shaping tiny figures out of clay. Some make animals, a bull, a dog, a bird. Others make little carts with wheels, tugging them along with string. Their laughter blends with the scrape of the grinders, the crackle of firewood, the murmur of voices. In the afternoons, the courtyards grow quiet. Heat is too strong, the light too sharp. Work pauses. People retreat into the shade of the rooms where the clay walls hold back the sun. Here they rest, stretched out on reed mats, speaking little, listening to the hum of insects in the silence. But in the evenings, the courtyards come alive again. Fires are lit, the smell of food drifts upward, rice bubbling in a pot, lentils stewing slowly, bread cooking on a hot slab of stone. The food is simple, but nourishing, shared by all. Some families sit together in their courtyards. Others carry their meals to the rooftops, where the air is cooler. Neighbors exchange greetings across the narrow lanes, voices carrying easily from one roof to another. It is a time of closeness, a time of warmth, a time when the entire city seems to soften. And always at the center of it all, there are the wells. In the mornings and evenings, the wells are gathering places. Women come with jars, men with buckets, children with little cups. The ropes creak, the jars splash, the water rises shimmering in the light. The sound of it is steady, soothing. Water striking clay, water flowing back into jars, water spilling in little streams onto the earth. These wells are more than sources of water. They're circles of community. Here news is shared, gossip exchanged, friendships renewed. Here the neighborhood breathes together. The water from the wells does not stay still for long. It is carried into homes, poured into storage jars, used for cooking and drinking. It is poured over tired bodies at the end of hot days, washing away sweat and dust. It is guided into drains, flowing out of the houses, running through brick-lined channels, keeping the streets clean. The city is alive with water, flowing quietly beneath the surface, always moving, always renewing. At night, the sounds of the wells grow softer. The day's work is done, the water jar is filled. Only an occasional creak of rope or soft laughter drifts upward from those who linger. The air grows cooler, carrying with it the hum of insects, the distant lowing of cattle, the faint bark of dogs. The rooftops are full now, mats are spread, children lie side by side, pointing at the stars. The constellations are bright and sharp, undimmed by smoke or light. They tell stories about the patterns above, a hunter, a bird, a river of fire across the sky. Perhaps these stories are lost to us now, but in that time, they were alive, carried from parent to child, from elder to youth. As the night deepens, voices grow softer. One by one, families fall silent. The air is filled only with the rustle of the wind, the endless hum of the night. Dogs curl up in doorways. Goats settle into corners, oxen shift, their bells tinkling faintly. And above it all, the stars shine down, watching over the sleeping city. This is daily life in the Indus Valley. Not a life of spectacle, but a life of rhythm. Waking at dawn, drawing water, grinding grain, working slowly through the heat, resting in shade, gathering again at evening, cooking food, climbing to rooftops, falling asleep beneath the sky. It is a life built not for kings, but for families. Not for battles, but for balance. A life where the home is not just walls of clay, but a shelter for voices, laughter, and dreams. A life where the well is not just stone and water, but the beating heart of the neighborhood. A life where every day follows the same steady rhythm, and every night ends with peace beneath the stars. The Indus Valley was a land of rivers. The Indus itself flowed strong and wide, joined by countless smaller streams. Its waters nourished the soil, turning the flat plains into fields of abundance. Here, farming was not just survival, it was the heartbeat of life. At dawn, the farmers rose from their clay houses, rubbing sleep from their eyes as the first light touched the rooftops. They walked out through the city's narrow streets, past neighbors fetching water from wells, past courtyards where women were grinding grain. Soon the houses gave way to open space. The air smelled different here, fresher, carrying the scent of wet earth and crops swaying in the fields. The land spread wide before them, patterned with furrows, green shoots, and ripening stalks. Here grew barley and wheat, their golden heads bowing gently in the morning breeze. Here grew lentils, peas, and sesame, small but nourishing. Cotton, too, sprouted in rows, its soft fibers gathered for cloth that would later be spun into threads and woven into garments. And above it all, the sky was never empty. Birds wheeled slowly in the light, their shadows circling above the fields and above the great granaries within the city. They watched, they waited, swooping down to steal stray kernels that slipped from baskets, or to peck at the stubble left behind after harvest. Their cries mingled with the rustle of stalks, a constant reminder that where there was grain, there was always life. The farmers worked with tools of wood and stone, sometimes tipped with copper. Plows were pulled by oxen, heavy animals with slow, patient steps. Their hooves pressed deep into the soil, turning it open to receive seeds. Men walked beside them, scattering grain with practiced hands, the seeds falling like rain into the earth. The sun rose higher, and the fields grew hot. Sweat beaded on foreheads, soaked into tunics, and dripped onto the soil. Still, the work continued, steady and calm. For the people of the Indus, this labor was as regular as breathing. Each season had its rhythm: sowing, growing, harvesting, storing. The cycle was endless, repeating year after year, always watched over by the sky and the river. When the harvest came, the fields grew loud again. Sickles flashed in the sunlight, cutting stalks that fell in golden heaps. Bundles were tied, carts were loaded, oxen strained as they carried the weight back toward the city. Children ran alongside, laughing, picking up stray grains and stuffing them into their mouths like treasures. And then, within the city walls, the harvest found its resting place. The great granaries stood tall, massive brick buildings raised on platforms, their walls thick and strong. Here, the grain was stored safely away from damp ground, away from flooding waters. Workers poured it into bins, layer upon layer, the sound of kernels spilling like soft rain. Dust rose in the air, glimmering in the light that slipped through small windows. Around the granaries, life was always in motion. Carts arrived, oxen bellowed, voices called out. It was not quiet, but not overwhelming either. Instead, it was a hum, steady, balanced, like the pulse of the city itself. Above the granaries, the birds still circled, waiting. They dipped low, fluttering at the edges, scavenging what they could. Their wings cast fleeting shadows over the workers, who hardly noticed, too absorbed in their endless rhythm. But the grain was not only for storage. Each morning, families came to draw from their supplies, carrying small baskets back to their homes. There, in the courtyards, it was ground into flour, boiled into stews, baked into bread. The simplest foods gave the greatest comfort: warm flatbreads, steaming pots of barley porridge, lentils spiced and shared among all. And so, farming and food were not distant labors, but the very heart of daily life. The river gave its waters, the soil gave its crops, and the city gathered it all in rhythm. Fields and granaries, homes and kitchens, all tied together, all breathing as one. At night, when the fields grew dark, the sounds of labor faded. Only the rustle of stalks remained, whispering in the wind. The granaries, too, fell quiet, their bins full, their walls silent. Yet, even in stillness, there was a sense of life waiting within. Seeds sleeping until the next day's fires, next day's meals. The city hummed softly like a lullaby. Farms beyond the walls, wells within. Granaries at the heart, all pulsing together in an endless cycle, steady as the stars. Within each home, food was not just sustenance. It was the thread that tied the day together. Morning, noon, and evening, the rhythm of life returned to the hearth. In the courtyards, women sat cross-legged on the ground, grinding grain between heavy stones. The sound was steady, a low rumble, as hands pushed and pulled, the flour gathering in smooth piles. Children sat nearby, watching, their fingers tracing patterns in the dust. The air was filled with the scent of raw grain, sharp and earthy, clinging to clothes and hair. From flour came bread, flat, round, simple, baked on hot stones. The warmth of it filled the courtyard, steam rising in gentle wisps. Alongside the bread, pots bubbled with barley stews, thick and hearty, flavored with lentils, peas, and sesame oil. Sometimes, dates were added for sweetness, or cucumbers for freshness. Other days, the meal was only bread and water, plain, but nourishing enough. Fires crackled in clay hearths, their smoke rising in thin spirals toward the open sky. The smell of burning wood mingled with the aroma of food, drifting over rooftops, drifting down narrow lanes. Everywhere the city breathed with the same rhythm. Families cooking, families eating, families sharing. The markets, too, were full of flavor. Stalls lined the streets, shaded by cloths that fluttered gently in the breeze. Here, farmers brought baskets of dates, melons, and gourds. Here, fishermen sold their catch. River fish glistening in the light, their scales flashing like silver. Traders shouted softly, not in anger but in rhythm, calling out the weight of grain, the price of sesame, the worth of cloth. The market was alive, yet calm. It was not quiet, but not overwhelming either. The sound of barter was low and steady, like the murmur of a flowing stream. Footsteps pressed into the dust, carts rattled by, oxen snorted. And above it all, birds circled lazily, waiting for scraps to fall. In the evenings, when the markets emptied, the leftovers returned to homes. Grain stored in clay jars, water poured into copper pots, vegetables laid neatly in baskets. Meals were prepared with patience, shared in courtyards or rooftops. No one ate alone if they could help it. Neighbors called to one another, offering extra bread, lending spices, sharing the sweetness of fruit. To eat was to belong, and to share food was to weave bonds that lasted longer than the meal itself. Festivals brought feasts. At harvest time, families cooked more than usual, filling pots with abundance. Children laughed as they carried trays of bread to neighbors, their hands warm from the fresh stones. Drums sounded in the background, feet stamped in rhythm, voices sang under the open sky. Even the animals seemed to join, oxen decorated with garlands, goats trotting through streets, dogs wagging their tails among the crowd. And still, after the noise of festivals, after the songs and the laughter, the city settled again into calm. The granaries stood silent, holding their wealth. The fields lay waiting, seeds planted for tomorrow. The hearths burned low, glowing embers sending out one last breath of smoke into the night. The stars overhead glimmered, just as they had for countless seasons. The same stars that had watched over farmers sowing seeds, the same stars that had shone above granaries filled with harvest, same stars that glimmered above rooftops where families shared their bread. Here in the Indus Valley, food was not only survival, it was community, it was rhythm. It was the heartbeat of the city, rising and falling with the seasons, steady as the flow of the river. And as sleep settled over the rooftops, the scent of grain and bread lingered in the air, soft, warm, everlasting. A promise that tomorrow, the rhythm would begin again. The Indus Valley was not only a land of farmers and fields, it was also a land of hands, hands that shaped clay, carved stone, polished beads, and wove fibers into cloth. Every street, every courtyard carried the hum of craft. The potters were among the busiest. In shaded workshops, they sat beside their wheels, their palms damp with clay. The wheels spun slowly, steady as a heartbeat. Clay rose beneath their fingers, soft at first, then firmer, taller, becoming bowls, jars, and wide-mouthed pots. Each piece turned smooth, its surface curved with care. When the shape was ready, the vessels were set aside to dry in the sun, their wet shine fading into pale earth. Later they would be fired in kilns, the flames licking their sides, hardening them for use. The finished pots were simple, yet beautiful. Some carried painted designs, black lines winding into fish, birds, or flowing waves. Others bore only the reddish glow of baked clay, plain but perfect for holding water or grain. And so, each home, each well, each market stall filled with pottery, crafted not just for function but also for quiet beauty. Nearby, beadmakers worked in patience. They gathered stones from riverbeds, carnelian, agate, lapis lazuli, brought from faraway hills. Each stone was cut, drilled, and polished by hand. Hours of labor went into a single bead, its surface smoothed until it caught the light. Then the beads were strung together into necklaces, bracelets, and ornaments. Worn around necks and wrists, they glimmered against skin, small tokens of wealth, small pieces of beauty carried through daily life. Metal workers, too, left their mark. In their forges, copper melted in clay crucibles, glowing like liquid fire. The air was hot, heavy, and filled with the sharp scent of burning fuel. From the molten copper came tools, chisels, knives, and small blades. From the same fire came ornaments, bangles, and pins, each hammered into shape with steady hands. Though bronze was still new, it began to appear in the city, stronger and sharper than copper alone. The work was slow, but every tool, every ornament, carried the weight of skill. Weavers worked with quieter tools. They spun cotton into threads, twisting fibers between fingers until strands grew long and fine. From these threads came cloth, woven on simple looms. The fabric was soft, light against the skin, perfect for the heat of summer. Garments hung loose and comfortable, tied with sashes or decorated with beads. In homes, mats were woven from reeds, laid across floors, spread on rooftops, or used in trade. The sound of weaving was gentle, a soft rhythm of fibers pulled tight, of threads pressed into place. And while these crafts filled the city with work, trade carried them outward. Carts loaded with jars and beads left through the gates, boats pushed off from the riverbanks, their wooden hulls rocking gently in the current. Along the waterways, goods traveled far. Grain and cotton left the valley, while stones, metals, and shells returned. From the coasts came shells that glittered white and pink. From the highlands came stones rich in color. Even beyond the valley, to Mesopotamia itself, the crafts of the Indus found their way. Seals stamped with carved animals, beads polished to perfection, cotton cloth soft against the skin, all carried across lands and seas. The markets echoed with this flow. Merchants stood beside their goods, calling gently to passers-by. Jars of oil, bundles of reeds, baskets of fish, all lined the streets. The air was thick with scents. Sesame oil sharp and nutty, fish salty from the river, spices earthy and warm. Coins were not yet used. Instead, trade was by weight, measured on balances with smooth stones as counters. Hands exchanged goods, nods sealed agreements, and the flow of life continued. It was not loud, not frantic. It was not quiet, but not overwhelming either. Instead, it was steady. The rhythm of work, the rhythm of exchange, the rhythm of lives tied together through craft and trade. And when the sun sank low, the workshops fell silent. Potters' wheels stood still, beads rested in bowls, looms lay empty. Fires in the forges burned down to ash. The workers returned to their homes, carrying the dust of clay, the shimmer of stone, the warmth of fire on their skin. They ate, they rested, they watched the stars. Yet in every jar, every bead, every woven mat, their hands remained. The city itself was filled with their labor, their patience, their rhythm. And even in sleep, the crafts of the Indus Valley whispered quietly in the night. Life in the Indus Valley was not lived alone. It unfolded in families and neighbors, in whole clusters of houses where voices blended together. Every courtyard, every rooftop, held pieces of daily life. Small rituals, small comforts, small joys. Houses here were not grand, towering structures. They were simple, built from baked brick and sun-dried clay. Yet inside, they held warmth. Flat rooftops gave space for sleep in summer. Cool rooms below offered shade in the day. Courtyards lay open, filled with light where meals were shared and tools were stored. The rhythm of life began early. Before dawn, mothers rose to fetch water, clay jars balanced on their hips. Children stirred awake, rubbing their eyes, listening to the low call of animals in the street. Fathers checked tools, prepared carts, or tended to goats and oxen, waiting at the thresholds. The city came alive not all at once, but in waves, like a song beginning with soft notes. Children played in the narrow lanes. Their laughter echoed between the walls, bouncing over rooftops, spilling into courtyards. With pebbles and clay balls, they invented games. They raced along the streets, chasing dogs, darting past wandering goats. Some climbed onto low walls, balancing carefully, arms spread wide against the sky. Others played with toys crafted by hand, little carts with rolling wheels, small clay animals shaped like bulls and birds. In their play, the whole city was a playground. Families gathered in the evenings. On rooftops, mats were spread out under the open stars. The air cooled, the heat of the day fading into soft breezes. Meals were eaten slowly. Bread passed around, stew ladled into bowls, fruit cut and shared. Children leaned against their mothers, listening to stories told in gentle voices. Stories of animals, of rivers, of seasons that came and went. Stories passed from one generation to the next, carried not in books but in memory, in voice, in song. It was not quiet, but not overwhelming either. The city murmured with calm voices, with the clink of pottery, with the faint rustle of wind through reeds. A dog barked, then lay back down. A baby cried, then was hushed by a lullaby. The hum of insects rose, steady and soothing, blending with the sound of distant footsteps. Community life extended beyond families. Neighbors leaned across low walls, calling out greetings. They borrowed grain, returned bread, shared water drawn from the same wells. Festivals brought entire neighborhoods together, music filling the streets. Garlands hung across doorways, drums beating in rhythm. People danced in circles, stamping their feet in time, clapping hands, singing in unison. And even those who did not dance watched with smiles, the joy carried by sound alone. Huddled elders were honored. They sat in courtyards, their voices soft but steady, telling of floods long ago, of harvests won and lost, of lessons carried through time. Children listened, wide-eyed, sometimes understanding, sometimes only remembering the tone of comfort. To grow old here was not to fade away, but to hold a place of wisdom, to guide, to remind. And through it all, life carried a gentle balance. Homes were close together, yet each had its own rhythm. Families worked hard, yet they also gathered to rest. Children played freely, yet they also helped with tasks. Carrying water, gathering reeds, shooing animals from the courtyards. Every role was woven into the larger pattern of the city, a pattern steady as the river's flow. At night, when lamps were lit, the glow of small flames flickered through narrow streets. From rooftop to rooftop, the light shimmered like stars brought down to earth. People lay on mats, gazing upward, the sky wide and endless above them. It was here, under the constellations, that the city found its deepest peace. The day's noise had settled, but not into silence. Instead, into a hum of many lives breathing together. Not quiet, not overwhelming, just balanced, just alive. And slowly, sleep came. 2 children dreaming of games, 2 parents resting from labor, 2 elders remembering stories of floods and harvests. The city of the Indus Valley closed its eyes, wrapped in the embrace of community, family, and belonging. In every corner of the city, life pulsed in rhythms both great and small. A single household was like a tiny world, yet it was never alone. The walls between families were thin, sometimes only a few bricks, sometimes a shared courtyard, and through them, voices carried. The sound of grinding stones was one of the most familiar. Inside nearly every home, women turned heavy stones against flat slabs, crushing grain into flour. Rhythm was steady, repetitive, almost like a heartbeat. Children sat nearby, watching, sometimes taking a turn with small hands, laughing at their own clumsy efforts. Bread came from this work, round, flat, baked on clay ovens, and its scent drifted down streets, mingling with the smell of smoke and cooking oil. Even in small moments, family bonds were felt. A father lifting a child onto his shoulders to see above the crowd. A mother braiding her daughter's hair as they sat on a rooftop in the evening breeze. A grandmother telling a story, her voice soft, her hands moving in patterns as if weaving the tale into the air. These were the quiet threads that tied generations together. Meals were not solitary. Food was prepared for all, placed in bowls, passed by hand. There was laughter when bread was torn unevenly, when a child tried to sneak a second piece of fruit, when goats pushed their noses too close to the meal. It was simple, but it was shared. The act of eating was never only about hunger. It was about belonging. Festivals brightened the calendar, marking the turn of seasons. Garlands of flowers hung from doorways. Drums echoed in the streets, their beats steady and deep. People painted their homes, swept the courtyards, prepared extra food to share. Children played in groups larger than usual, chasing each other in games that wove through the alleys like winding rivers. At night, under the glow of oil lamps, neighbors gathered in circles to sing, voices blended, not polished, not rehearsed, but full of life. The sound rose upward into the sky, joining the stars in their endless watch. Community was not only about joy, but also about care. When someone fell ill, others brought food, fetched water, tended to animals. When floods threatened the streets, neighbors worked together, stacking sandbags, lifting possessions to rooftops. No family stood alone. Strength came from the whole, from many hands moving together. And through all this, children were never far from the center. They carried water in small jars, learning balance step by careful step. They followed herds of goats, waving sticks to guide them. They sat beside elders at markets, learning the art of exchange, watching the careful weighing of goods. Yet after every task, there was still time to play, to chase, to dream. The city itself was their playground, alive with possibilities. At night, the family rooftops became quiet islands beneath the stars. Parents lay side by side, children nestled close, elders wrapped in woven mats. Above them stretched the endless sky, filled with constellations they had known since childhood. They pointed, whispered, told stories of animals drawn across the heavens. The bull, the bird, the serpent. Children listened, eyes heavy, drifting into sleep as the hum of insects wrapped around them. The city was alive, but at peace. It was not quiet, but not overwhelming either. It breathed with the rhythm of families, of neighbors, of children's dreams, and elders' stories. And in that rhythm, the Indus Valley found its strength. Not in towers, not in armies, but in the simple, steady pulse of community. Beyond the noise of streets, beyond the rhythm of work and play, there was another layer to life in the Indus Valley. The unseen, the sacred. It moved quietly, woven into daily life, never separate from the ordinary. The houses here were simple, but within them small corners may have held shrines. Little shelves where figures sat, where oil lamps flickered, where offerings were placed. Clay figurines of women with rounded forms, perhaps symbols of fertility, stood as guardians of the home. Bull figurines, too, sat in shrines, horns curved proudly, strength embodied in their form. Each figure was more than an object. It was a reminder, a wish, a connection to the cycles of life that governed everything. Fire was central. Every home had a hearth, but fire meant more than heat. It was life. Cooked meals, baked bricks, warmed families in the cool of night. But in some places, it burned in ritual spaces, tended with care, fed with offerings. Its smoke curled upward, carrying silent prayers into the endless sky. The flame was fragile, yet enduring, a mirror of life itself. Water, too, carried sacred weight. The Indus was more than a river. It was the giver of fields, the nourisher of crops, the bringer of both abundance and destruction. To live by it was to respect it, to fear it, to honor it. Within the city's wells stood at the heart of neighborhoods, not only as sources of water but as gathering points. Each bucket drawn was like a blessing, each drop a reminder of survival. And in Mohenjo-daro, one structure rose above the rest. The Great Bath, a vast pool. Lined with baked bricks, sealed carefully against leaking water. Steps led down on every side. Here, perhaps people bathed not only to cleanse their bodies, but to purify their spirits. The still surface of the water reflected the open sky, a mirror joining heaven and earth. Symbols spoke where words are lost to us. Stone seals, carved with intricate designs, carried meanings now half hidden. Animals marched across their surfaces, elephants with slow strength, tigers with fierce gaze, unicorn-like beasts, and bulls with mighty horns. Some bore human figures, seated cross-legged, surrounded by animals, head crowned with horns. Perhaps a ruler, perhaps a god of wild things, perhaps a protector of balance. The seals were pressed into clay, marking goods, marking ownership, but perhaps also carrying blessings. A silent language, preserved in stone, whispering across 4,000 years. Belief lived not only in objects but in cycles, and in the sowing of seeds, in the harvest of grain, in the flooding of the river, in the drying of the land, the birth of children, and the passing of elders. Each moment was both ordinary and sacred. Every act of survival was also an act of faith. Festivals, too, may have carried sacred tones. When drums beat and garlands hung, when people danced in circles under the moon, it was not only celebration, it was gratitude. To the river, to the fields, to the unseen forces that held life together. Songs rose, hands clapped, feet stamped in unison. In those moments, community became something more. The people moved as one body, one voice, one prayer. And always above them, the sky stretched vast and eternal. Stars wheeled overhead, familiar and yet mysterious. Families pointed to them from rooftops, weaving stories of animals, rivers, and gods traced in the heavens. The constellations were guides, reminders, companions of the night. Under them, the city breathed. In belief, though silent, lived in every breath. The Indus Valley's sacred world was not built of towering temples or carved monuments. It was built in flame and water, in clay and seal, in song and story. It was lived in quiet corners, in fields under the sun, in rooftops under the stars. Not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, enduring, carried forward in every heart. The market did not belong only to the day. At night, when lamps glowed and the air cooled, some stalls stayed open, their keepers calling softly to passers-by. Clay lamps flickered on walls, their flames bending in the wind. The scent of spices, cardamom, turmeric, dried ginger, lingered in the air. Merchants sat cross-legged, counting beads, weighing metal, marking jars with seals pressed into soft clay. The work of trade never fully stopped. Children watched the market with wide eyes. They saw not only goods but wonders. A bright blue stone, smooth and polished, catching light like the sky itself. Seashell, still smelling faintly of salt, though the ocean lay far away. A copper blade, shining with a sharp edge. These things carried mystery, the hint of lands beyond their own. To a child, they were treasures. To a merchant, they were lifelines. Caravans moved slowly across the land, their pace steady, deliberate. At night, they stopped in open ground, circling wagons for safety. Fires burned, and men sat in groups, eating bread baked on hot stones, drinking from leather flasks. They told stories to pass the time, stories of storms in the desert, of rivers that ran dry, of mountain passes haunted by spirits. The sound of oxen lowing drifted into the night, mingling with the crackle of flames. In the distance, stars shone down, silent witnesses to every journey. River traders faced their own perils. The Indus was vast and unpredictable. In flood season, the waters rose high, fierce and swift, carrying branches, uprooted trees, whole chunks of earth. In dry season, the water thinned, boats scraping against hidden sandbars. Yet the river remained the lifeblood of trade. Its currents linked city to city, village to village, heart to heart. Boatmen learned its moods as one learns the moods of a friend, patient when calm, cautious when restless. Seals played a quiet but vital role in this web of exchange. Trader pressed his carved seal into wet clay, leaving behind an image. A bull, a fish, a strange symbol. It marked ownership. It marked trust. The seal told others, "This belongs to me. It has passed through my hands." In this way, small objects carried not only goods, but identity. Each seal was like a signature, unique and personal, enduring through centuries. The warehouses stood as silent giants of trade, rows of baked brick buildings filled with sacks of grain, jars of oil, bundles of cotton. The air inside was cool, shaded, filled with the scent of earth and harvest. Granaries rose above them, their massive walls sheltering the surplus that fed the city. Above, birds circled, crows, pigeons, hawks, wheeling lazily in the sky as if guarding the wealth stored within. From these granaries, food flowed outward, traded for metals, stones, and treasures from afar. The hum of life in the city was rooted in these silent stores. The city was steady, but never still. Every cart that rolled, every boat that drifted, every caravan that trudged across the desert carried a piece of it outward, and in return, each brought back a piece of the wider world. A pot of honey from distant fields, stone carved by foreign hands. A tale of lands beyond mountains, where rivers ran differently, where stars were called by other names. In the Indus Valley, trade was not greed. It was survival. It was curiosity. It was the gentle weaving of connection across distance, weaving that bound together not just goods, but people, cultures, and dreams. And so each evening, as markets faded and lamps dimmed, the city held within it the memory of countless journeys. Journeys across rivers, deserts, seas, journeys that began with a single step, a single cart, a single hand extended in trade. In the heart of the city, away from the clamor of markets and the heavy walls of granaries, there were quieter places, workshops. Here the hum of life took a different form, not the bargaining of traders, not the rhythm of oxen, but the steady hands of craftsmen at work. The houses here were not grand towering structures. They were modest, narrow, simple. Within their walls, artistry lived. Potters, beadmakers, metalworkers, stone carvers, each left behind traces of their skill, traces that whispered to us across 4,000 years. Clay was the beginning for many, soft, damp, pliable in the hand. A potter sat at his wheel, the clay spinning beneath his fingers. His touch was gentle yet firm, coaxing the earth into shape. A bowl rose, its sides curving smooth. A jar took form, narrow at the neck, wide at the base, built to hold water, grain, or oil. When the pot was shaped, it was set aside to dry, then baked in fire until it rang with a hollow strength. Some pots were plain, sturdy, made for daily use. Others bore painted designs, flowing lines, peacocks with spreading tails. Fish gliding across the surface, circles repeating like the turning of seasons. Its stroke of paint was a gesture of beauty offered to the everyday. In another corner, beads glistened in the sun. 8 beadmakers drilled tiny holes into carnelian stones, polishing them until they shone like drops of fire. Others worked with steatite, soft and pale, carving it into small, perfect cylinders. Lapis lazuli, turquoise, shell. Each material carried its own feel, its own light. The beads were strung together into necklaces, bracelets, ornaments that adorned the body. A child's ankle might jingle with shell beads. A merchant's neck might gleam with polished carnelian. Beauty, like food, was part of survival. Metalworkers gave shape to strength. In the glow of their fires, copper was melted, poured, hammered into tools and weapons. Axes, blades, chisels, each carried the weight of human need. But even here, beauty found its way. Tiny copper figurines, miniature carts, ornaments, objects not only for use, but for wonder. The line between necessity and art was blurred, as it often is in the oldest worlds. Stone carvers, too, left behind whispers of their work. Seals, carved with precision, bore images of bulls, tigers, and strange symbols. Each line was cut with care, each detail chosen with meaning. The seals were small but powerful, the work of patient hands that understood both stone and story. Even the weaving of cotton held artistry. The Indus Valley was among the first to spin cotton into thread, to weave it into cloth. Soft fabric wrapped around bodies, protecting them from sun and wind. Some dyed with color, some plain and white. Cloth was traded, worn, folded away in storage jars. Though it has not survived the centuries, its imprint remains. Threads once drawn from plant to hand to loom. The craftsmen worked not in grand halls but in small rooms, shaded from the sun. Their tools were simple, their patience endless. Each object they made was a bridge between need and beauty. A pot that carried water, a bead that shone at a festival, a seal that marked identity, a blade that cut wood for building, all tied together in the fabric of daily life. In the evening, after the fires dimmed and the tools were set aside, craftsmen sat outside their homes. They listened to the hum of the city, the footsteps in narrow streets, the distant call of animals, the laughter of children. Their hands, tired from work, rested in their laps. But the things they had made remained behind, woven into the life of the city. Objects humble and strong. Objects fragile and beautiful, carrying the touch of human hands, each a whisper of lives lived long ago. The city hummed with trade and farming, but in the workshops, the hum was different. It was quieter, steadier, broken not by shouts of merchants, but by the scrape of stone on stone, the thud of a hammer, the low crackle of fire. These were not places of noise, but of rhythm. Each tool's sound was part of a slow music that only the craftsman truly heard. The bead makers worked with patience that seemed endless. To drill through carnelian, hard, unyielding stone, required hours, sometimes days of work. The bead spun on a stick of wood, a bowstring pulling back and forth, the tip of a drill slowly cutting deeper. The sound was soft, a faint rasp. The man's hands never hurried. Mistake would break the stone. But when at last the drill passed through, the bead was whole. A perfect sphere or cylinder, glowing with color, ready to join others in a necklace. A single bead carried the memory of a craftsman's patience. In the potter's quarter, the air smelled of clay and smoke. Children watched as wheels turned, wide-eyed, as lumps of mud became bowls before their eyes. The wheels spun, the pot grew, the shape rose as if summoned from the earth itself. Sometimes the children laughed, pressing their own fingers into scraps of clay, shaping crude figures of animals or people. They dried them in the sun, playthings for an afternoon. The same clay that held water in jars could also hold imagination. In the metalworker's space, the glow of fire was constant. Copper and bronze were heated until they softened, glowing red, ready to be shaped. The air was warm, heavy, filled with the metallic temps of molten ore. Men bent over their work, hammering out shapes, tools sharp enough to cut wood, ornaments delicate enough to wear on a wrist. Each strike of the hammer rang out like a heartbeat, echoing against the walls. Tools for farmers, blades for carpenters. Tiny figurines, perhaps for rituals, or perhaps only for joy. Even here, function and beauty walked side by side. The seal carvers worked with tools so fine, their hands seemed almost to whisper over the stone. Each seal was no larger than a child's palm, yet it carried an entire world. A unicorn, carved with elegant lines, a bullhorn sweeping upward, a tiger frozen in mid-stride. Symbols, mysterious, arranged above or below. The carver leaned close, breathing slowly, eyes sharp, hands steady. Every cut mattered. Seal would not only press into clay, it would press into memory, marking goods, marking trust, marking identity. Shell workers lived near the coast, where the ocean brought them gifts. They gathered shells, polishing them until they gleamed pale in the sun. Bracelets were cut, smooth and circular, worn on arms and wrists. Children loved them, women cherished them, men traded them across distances. The ocean's whisper remained in each piece, even when worn deep inland, far from the sea. The weavers spun cotton into thread, their fingers moving with practiced ease. The whir of the spindle filled their homes as thread wound tighter and tighter. Some dyed the threads with earthy reds or soft blues, weaving them into cloth that was both light and strong. Cotton garments draped loosely, cooling the body beneath the hot summer sun. The cloth carried no grand patterns, no gilded decoration, but it carried comfort, and comfort was its own kind of beauty. Art in the Indus Valley was not only for the powerful, not locked away in palaces or temples. It lived in every household, painted jar on a shelf, a bracelet on a wrist, a tiny clay bowl that a child pushed through the dust as if it were alive. Beauty belonged to the people, woven into the rhythm of daily life. At dusk, when work ended, the streets of the craftsman's quarter filled with voices. Men and women sat outside their homes, cooling jars of water beside them. Children played with clay toys, rolling them in the dirt. The craftsman's hands, tired but steady, rested for the night. But in the city, their work remained everywhere, in kitchens, in storerooms, in markets, in shrines. Their creations touched every life, silent, small, humble, yet enduring. Even now, thousands of years later, when archaeologists brush away the dust and lift a shard of pottery or a carved seal, the craftsman's touch still lingers. A curve of clay, a stroke of paint, a cut into stone, the echo of hands that shaped a world. He's city was made of bricks and streets, wells and drains. But its true heart was the people who filled it. Families who lived side by side, who worked, played, argued, celebrated, and endured together. Behind every wall, every doorway, there was a rhythm of life, too quiet to leave behind in stone, yet it was the rhythm that kept the city alive. Most homes were not palaces. The houses here were not grand, towering structures. They were small, built of baked brick, square or rectangular, arranged around a courtyard. The courtyard was the center of the home. Here the family gathered. Here meals were cooked over clay hearths, smoke curling upward. Here water was stored in tall jars, cool even in the heat of summer. Rooms opened off the courtyard, some for sleeping, some for storage. The roofs were flat, made of beams and reeds packed with clay. On hot nights, families carried mats to the roof. They lay beneath the stars, listening to the hum of insects. The distant sound of dogs barking, the faint voices of neighbors doing the same. The air was cooler there, the sky wide and endless. It was not quiet, but not overwhelming either. A balance of sound that lulled the city to sleep. Children ran through the streets barefoot, their laughter echoing between walls. They played with toys made of clay, tiny carts with wheels, little animals shaped by hand, spinning tops that danced on the ground. Some toys were simple, little more than lumps of clay shaped into figures. Others were carefully crafted, proof that even play was given attention. They chased one another in the dust, played games with stones, splashed in pools after monsoon rains. But childhood was not only play. Children helped in daily work. They carried water jars, fed goats, gathered kindling. Girls learned to spin thread, to grind grain, to tend small fires. Boys followed their fathers into fields, or sat near workshops, watching hand-shaped clay, metal, or stone. Life was teaching every day. Meals and togetherness evenings often brought families together for meals. Food was simple but nourishing. Wheat ground into flour, baked into flatbread. Lentils simmered in clay pots. Rice in some regions, millet in others. Cucumbers, dates, melons, food grown nearby or brought from markets. Fish from rivers, meat on rare occasions. Food was shared, eaten from common dishes, a rhythm of passing and giving. There was little waste. Ashes from cooking fires went into the streets, where they hardened the ground. Broken pots were used again, as lids or scoops. Every object, every scrap, had a purpose. Neighbors were close, their homes pressed side by side. Courtyards opened to courtyards, doorways to doorways. Voices carried easily, laughter spilling across walls. Women spoke as they ground grain together. Men gathered in the shade, speaking of work, trade, or crops. Children wandered freely between homes, claimed by many watchful eyes. Life was not solitary. It was shared, woven together in countless small threads. In times of joy, communities celebrated. We do not know the festivals they kept, but we can imagine them. Music, drums, dancing, feet on packed earth. Bright beads worn in hair and around necks. Fires glowing, voices rising together in the night. A festival was not only ritual, it was memory, a weaving of people into one. In times of hardship, the bonds mattered just as much. When monsoon rains swelled, the river and waters rose. Neighbors helped one another build barriers of mud and brick. When wells ran dry in summer, water was shared. When illness came, families cared for more than their own. The city endured because the people endured together. At night, families returned to their homes. Fires dimmed. Doors closed. The city settled. But rooftops filled again, as mats were laid out under the stars. Children curled beside parents. Old stories were told. Stories of ancestors, of rivers, of gods and spirits that guided the world. The air cooled. The hum of the city softened, never silent, but gentle. A lullaby of distant sounds. This was the life not of kings or conquerors, but of families. The heartbeat of the Indus Valley was not found in monuments, but in courtyards, in kitchens, in children's laughter, in the murmur of voices under the stars.
Wow.
The city endured not only because it was built of brick and water, but because it was built of people bound together, day by day, in the quiet strength of community. Inside the homes, Life was made of countless small gestures. A mother sprinkling water on the courtyard floor to keep the dust down. A child balancing carefully as he carried a small jar, the cool clay pressing against his hands. An elder sitting in the shade, mending a mat with quiet patience, humming softly as she worked. The smell of grain toasting on a flat stone. The faint creak of wooden doors on their hinges. The houses were modest, yet they breathed with life. Every corner held the memory of hands smoothing clay walls, sweeping dust with reed brooms, arranging jars neatly against the wall. Even the silence was never empty, carried the warmth of presence, the closeness of family. The rooftops at night. Perhaps the most treasured space of all was the rooftop. By day, it was a place to dry grain, to spread clothes in the sun, to store bundles of reeds or firewood. But by night, it became a world of its own. Families carried mats up the stairs, rolling them out carefully. Children scrambled to find their favorite spots, peering at the sky as stars slowly appeared. The air cooled, carrying with it the distant smell of earth after a long hot day. Dogs barked in the distance. Flute drifted faintly through the night air, someone playing. Somewhere in the city, their notes carrying like a lullaby. Here, under the stars, the city felt both immense and small. The lights of oil lamps flickered in other homes, each one a tiny fire, a tiny heartbeat in the dark. People spoke in low voices, telling stories, sharing laughter, whispering prayers. And slowly, one by one, voices faded, leaving only the steady breath of sleep. Childhood games and learning children were not idle, yet their world was filled with joy. Their games echoed down the narrow lanes, played tag, their feet kicking up dust as they darted past doorways. They drew lines in the dirt for simple board games, moving pebbles as pieces, laughing at small victories. Spinning tops whirled across the ground, wobbling before falling. Toy carts rattled over stones pulled by string. Even broken beads and shards of pottery became treasures, collected and traded among friends. But games taught lessons too. Boys who shaped clay animals learned the curve of a bull's horn, the strength in its shoulders. Girls who spun thread beside their mothers learned patience, the rhythm of the spindle. Children were always watching, always imitating. Their play was their preparation. A shared city beyond the walls of a single house. The whole neighborhood was an extension of family. The street was not just a passage, but a meeting place. Neighbors leaned in doorways, calling greetings. Children wandered freely, claimed by many mothers' eyes, many fathers' voices. A child who stumbled was lifted not only by a parent, but by anyone nearby. When food was plentiful, it was shared. When sickness came, help was given without hesitation. Even grief was communal. A family's sorrow was softened by the presence of others. Neighbors bringing water, bread, quiet company. The city lived not in isolation, but in the weaving together of lives. Enduring bonds, this was what allowed the Indus Valley cities to endure, even through harsh summers and heavy floods. No one person could stand against the power of the monsoon or the drought of a long season, but together. With hands joined, with voices lifted, with wells shared, families and neighbors could weather the storm. The community was not loud, it was steady, not grand, but enduring. And in its quiet strength, it created something remarkable. Cities where thousands of people could live side by side in harmony, with balance, with care. At the end of each day, as the rooftops filled once again with sleeping families beneath the stars, the city exhaled. 1,000 homes, 1,000 stories, all part of one. The hum of life was never gone. It lingered, soft and unbroken, like a lullaby that carried across centuries. The city was alive not only with work and family, but with something quieter, something harder to see. Beneath the surface of daily life flowed belief. It was not written in long texts, not carved on towering monuments. It lived in gestures, in symbols, in the quiet rituals that carried meaning from one day to the next. At dawn, a woman poured water from a jar onto the courtyard floor, sprinkling it to settle the dust. It was a practical act, but also a sacred one. The earth was honored. The space was cleansed. The home was readied for the day. Fire, too, carried weight beyond its warmth. Every household needed it, to cook, to bake, to harden clay, yet fire was more than a tool. Its light flickered in small hearths set aside for offerings. Families may have sat together, whispering words as smoke curled upward into the air. The flame was alive, unpredictable, always reaching toward the sky. It became a bridge between earth and the unseen. Water held its own place of reverence. Wells were not only practical, but life-giving, sacred in their depth. Each drop drawn up was a reminder of abundance hidden within the ground. In Mohenjo-Daro stood a great pool, carefully lined with brick, sealed so no water would escape. Steps led down on every side, inviting people to enter, to bathe, to be renewed. Perhaps the act of bathing was not only about cleanliness, but about rebirth. It's about stepping into still water and leaving behind the dust of the day. Symbols carried beliefs silently through the city. Seals carved from stone bore the shapes of animals, bulls with strong horns, elephants, tigers, birds. On some, a horned figure sat cross-legged, surrounded by beasts, watchful, powerful. Perhaps a god of nature, of balance, of fertility. These seals were pressed into clay, marking goods, traveling from hand to hand. Each impression carried meaning, even if the language is lost to us. Fertility was honored in homes. Small clay figurines of women with rounded forms have been uncovered, simple yet powerful. They may have been placed in corners, on shelves, in household shrines. Perhaps they were carried as charms for safe births, for health, for the endless cycle of life to continue. Each one a quiet prayer, shaped by hand, held in faith. Belief was woven into farming too. Every seed pressed into the soil was an act of trust, that the rains would come, the floods would not destroy, that the harvest would rise green and full. The farmer's hand was steady, but his heart was always turned toward the forces beyond his control. Each furrow of earth, each drop of water, was bound with hope. Even the city itself may have carried meaning. Its order, its balance, the way streets and drains and wells were planned with care. It was not chaos, it was harmony, a reflection of how people wished their lives to flow, steady, balanced, enduring. At night, under the stars, the sacred continued. Families whispered stories of gods and spirits. Children fell asleep to tales of rivers, of animals, of powers that moved unseen. The hum of insects and the glow of the moon were part of it too. The world itself was a temple. Earth, fire, water, sky, each one honored, each one alive. Belief in the Indus Valley was not shouted, not carved into massive monuments. It was lived in every breath, in every offering, in every quiet ritual. It was woven into the fabric of life so closely that it could not be separated from it. Sacredness was not apart from the ordinary. It was the ordinary, deepened, honored, made eternal. Belief in the unseen was not only a private matter of hearth and household, but at certain times whole communities would have gathered, marking days that carried meaning beyond the ordinary. We cannot name these festivals with certainty, but traces remain, in the great pools, in the wide courtyards, and the objects carefully placed in the earth. Imagine the city preparing for such a day. The air alive with anticipation. Courtyards swept clean, doorways decorated with fresh clay designs or garlands of leaves. Women setting aside beads, bangles, bright cloth to wear. Children restless with excitement, their voices carrying through the narrow streets. Music was part of these gatherings. Drums sounded, deep, steady, like the heartbeat of the city itself. Flutes carried high notes above them, dancing in the air. Perhaps voices joined in chants, repeating words older than memory. The sound rolled down the streets, circling above granaries and fields, gathering the people together. It was not quiet, but not overwhelming either. A harmony of sound, rising and falling like breath. The great pool may have filled with those seeking renewal. Men and women stepping down its brick steps, the water cool against their skin. Each immersion, a letting go, a washing away, a beginning again. Water was not only for the body but for the spirit, a mirror reflecting both earth and sky. Sacred fire burned in hearths set aside for the occasion. Offerings placed gently, grains, butter, fragrant herbs. The smoke lifted into the air, carrying prayers unseen. Children watched, wide-eyed, learning through silence how reverence was shown. Some gathered around shrines within their homes, small altars with clay figures, tiny lamps, tokens of animals or ancestors. Others turned to the open sky, offering nothing but breath and words. Belief had no single form here. It lived in the diversity of practices, the many ways people sought to touch what lay beyond their reach. Animals, too, were bound to this sacred world. The bull, powerful and strong, symbol of fertility and strength. The elephant, slow and steady, guardian of wisdom. The tiger, fierce, untamed, a reminder of nature's wild spirit. These creatures walked both the fields and the imagination. Their images carved into seals, pressed into clay, carried far beyond the city. When the day of ritual ended, the city quieted again. Drums faded, fires dimmed. The pool stilled, its surface smooth as glass. Families returned home, carrying with them the weight and lightness of what had been shared. The city was the same, and yet, in some way, renewed. Faith here was not about distance. It was not held far away in towering temples or distant mountains. It was close, woven into hands, into water, into animals, into earth. Sacredness was lived, felt in every ordinary gesture, and in the gatherings that drew many hearts into one.
In quiet corners of the home, sacred objects rested. They were not grand treasures meant to dazzle, but small, personal things that carried weight beyond their size. A bead worn smooth from years against the skin. A carved amulet tucked into a pouch, tied around the wrist, or placed near a sleeping mat. A small figurine pressed gently into a hand before a journey began. Beads, especially, were more than ornaments. Made of carnelian, agate, steatite, or shell, they shimmered softly in the light. Some were simple, plain, their beauty in their shape alone. Others were etched with fine patterns, symbols that perhaps spoke to those who wore them. A string of beads around the neck was not just decoration. It was protection, identity, and connection all in one. Seals carved from stone may have also served as charms. A merchant pressing one into clay marked his goods, but perhaps he also carried the seal for what it meant. A bull for strength, a unicorn for mystery, a bird for freedom. The act of carrying such an image, holding it in one's hand, gave comfort, a reminder of unseen powers watching over daily life. Children, too, had their charms. Small toys carved of clay, carts, animals, rattles, may have doubled as protectors. A mother handing her child a tiny clay bowl was not just offering play, but safety, a token to watch over them as they grew. Every object, no matter how small, carried a story. Figurines of women with full hips and rounded forms were among the most common sacred objects. They sat on shelves, in alcoves, perhaps beside tiny lamps. To hold one was to hold a prayer for life, for birth, for growth, for the unbroken cycle to continue. They were humble, yet they held within them the most powerful of hopes. Even stones carried meaning. A smooth pebble picked from a river might be kept, polished by time and water. A reminder of shells carried from distant seas were prized, not just for beauty, but for their connection to the vastness of the world beyond the valley. Objects from faraway places were not just goods. They were gifts from distant lands, carrying their own silent energy. At night, when lamps burned low and the city hushed, such objects remained near. Beside mats, beside doors, beside hearths. They were small anchors of faith, silent guardians against the unknown. And though we cannot hear the words once whispered over them, we can feel their weight still. The people of the Indus Valley trusted in what they could see. The clay, the stone, the shell, to connect with what they could not see. The vast and the eternal.
The Indus Valley was not an isolated world. Its cities, its fields, its rivers, all were part of something larger, something that stretched far beyond what the eye could see. Trade was the thread that connected this civilization to distant lands, weaving people, goods, and ideas together across great distances. Along the wide Indus River, boats drifted slowly, Flat-bottomed vessels carved from wood, pushed forward by poles or sails, carried goods downstream. Grain sealed in clay jars, bundles of cotton cloth, baskets of dates, bright carnelian beads strung on threads. The river was a road as much as water, a living highway that linked city to city, village to village. At night, the boats would moor along the banks, their crews resting by fires, watching the reflection of stars ripple across the surface. On land, caravans moved steadily. Oxen pulled carts laden with goods, their wooden wheels creaking on dusty tracks. Traders walked alongside, guiding animals, keeping pace mile after mile. The heat pressed down, but the journey continued. At night, they gathered under the open sky, cooking simple meals, sleeping on mats, guarded by the steady breathing of their animals. In the bustling streets of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, markets hummed with exchange. Merchants set out their wares, copper tools gleaming in the sun, beads sparkling in neat rows, cloth folded into careful stacks. The air carried the scent of spices, oils, and cooked food. Buyers moved slowly from stall to stall, voices blending in a steady murmur. It was not quiet, but not overwhelming either. The sound of a city alive with exchange. Trade stretched far beyond the valley. To the east, connections reached toward the plains of the Ganges, to smaller farming communities and distant forests. To the west, caravans crossed deserts, carrying beads, shells, and cotton toward the mountains of Baluchistan and beyond. And still farther west, across the sea, ships sailed to Mesopotamia. Clay tablets from the cities of Sumer speak of merchants from a distant place called Meluha. This name, scholars believe, may have meant the Indus Valley itself. Their goods, beads of carnelian, woods from Indian forests, ivory, cotton, traveled across seas into hands thousands of miles away. Imagine a harbor where such ships set sail. The smell of salt in the air, waves rocking wooden hulls tied with rope, men loading cargo, balancing jars of grain and pottery, sealing them with clay impressed by small square seals. Birds circled overhead, wheeling above granaries and fields nearby, watching as the boats slipped out onto the open water. The horizon swallowed them, carrying the valley's spirit into distant lands. Trade was not only about goods. It carried ideas, too. Stories told by merchants at night fires. Songs exchanged across languages. New objects brought home, sparking curiosity. Even if people never left their city, they touched the world beyond through the beads they wore, the shells they held, the woods that burned in their hearths. The Indus Valley was not a closed world. It was open, flowing, alive with connection. It's the rhythm of ox carts, the creak of boats, the murmur of markets. All part of a greater heartbeat, one that linked this land to a wider world. The morning sun rose over the city, casting long shadows across the streets. A merchant stood outside his clay brick house, supervising as workers loaded goods onto a cart. The bullocks snorted, stamping their hooves, their horns wrapped with cords to guide them. Jars of grain tightly sealed with clay stoppers. Bundles of cotton woven into cloth light and strong. Beads strung neatly in rows, carnelian glowing a deep red, agate soft and pale. Each item carried the labor of many hands. Farmers, weavers, bead makers, potters, and now it was bound for faraway lands. The journey began along the dusty tracks leading out of Mohenjo-daro. The city slowly faded behind, its walls shrinking into the horizon. Ahead stretched the open plains, where fields of wheat and barley gave way to scrubland. The creak of the cartwheels blended with the lowing of oxen. Merchants walked alongside, staffs in hand, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of travelers or bandits. By nightfall, they stopped by a well, a familiar resting place. Fires were lit, bread was baked on flat stones. The desert air grew cold, and men wrapped themselves in cotton shawls, falling asleep beneath the stars. Days later, the caravan reached the edge of the river. Boats waited, simple but strong, their hulls lined with planks, bound together by rope. Goods were unloaded, carefully balanced in the vessels. The oxen remained on land, but the merchants stepped aboard, pushing off with long poles. The Indus flowed steadily, carrying them downstream, past villages that lined its banks. Children waved from the shore, women bent over washing clothes, fishermen casting their nets. The river was wide, alive, and unending. The boats drifted for days. At night they anchored near sandbanks, cooking rice and lentils, keeping watch over their cargo. Fires flickered along the shore, reflections shimmering in the water. The steady hum of insects filled the night, blending with the creak of wooden boats. Here the merchants shared stories of the cities downstream, of distant lands where strange languages were spoken, of seas that stretched beyond sight. The river carried not only goods, but imagination. At last, the journey reached the coast. There, in small harbors, ships waited. These were larger, sturdier, built for the sea. They swayed gently in the waves, ropes creaking, sails furled tight. Merchants and sailors worked together to load the cargo. Heavy jars of grain, bundles of cloth, beads packed in wooden boxes. Seals were pressed into lumps of clay to mark ownership. Small squares bearing images of bulls, elephants, or unicorn-like creatures. These seals were both protection and signature, proof that the cargo was true. The voyage across the sea began at dawn. The horizon stretched endless, a shimmering line where water met sky. Winds filled the sails. The ship groaned as it moved forward. Days passed in the rhythm of waves, the taste of salt on lips, the cry of seabirds fading as land slipped behind. The crew worked in silence, repairing ropes, steering by the sun and stars. Nights were long, filled with the vast hum of the ocean, a sound deeper and steadier than the river ever gave. Weeks later, the ship reached the harbors of Mesopotamia. The smell of foreign spices filled the air. Tall ziggurats rose above the skyline. Markets spread wide, filled with goods unfamiliar, fine wool from the plains, metals from distant mountains, strange jars filled with oils and perfumes. The merchants of the Indus stepped onto the dock, their cargo carried ashore. The seals were broken, the goods laid out. Foreign eyes widened at the bright carnelian beads, the smooth cotton cloth, the ivory carved into small shapes. Here the products of the valley became treasures in another world. And when their trade was done, the merchants carried back new goods, copper and tin for tools, woolen garments. Perhaps even stories and ideas shared around fires and carried across seas. The journey home was as long as the way out, but each step bound the valley more tightly to the world beyond. The Indus Valley was never truly alone. Through the creak of wheels, the rhythm of oars, the pull of sails, its people reached far. The flow of goods, the movement of people, the sharing of ideas, all kept the cities alive, connected, and vibrant. The world did not end at the edge of their fields, stretched outward, vast, and the merchants of the Indus walked its roads and sailed its waters. Life in the Indus Valley was not only about work, or farming, or trade. It was also about joy, about the small moments of play, of song, of laughter, that gave balance to long days. Children filled the narrow streets with energy. They played with toys shaped from clay, tiny carts with wheels that really turned, small animals molded with careful fingers, rattles that shook softly when moved. Some toys were painted with stripes or dots, a splash of color to make them come alive. Children chased each other through the alleys, voices rising and fading, their games weaving through the city like threads of music. Laughter echoed against the brick walls, lightening the air. But games were not just for children. Adults too played. Flat game boards scratched into the ground or carved into stone have been found, their patterns still clear. Counters of shell, terracotta, or stone were moved carefully from one square to the next. Men sat in circles, concentrating, leaning forward, debating moves. The air around them hummed with quiet excitement, not overwhelming, not silent either, but alive with the rhythm of play. Music drifted through the streets as well. Simple instruments made of clay and bone carried sound across courtyards and rooftops. Flutes carved from reeds gave a soft, breathy voice, imitating the call of birds in the evening sky. Drums stretched with leather skins beat steady rhythms, low and grounding, echoing like the heart. At night, families gathered as music blended with the chirping of crickets, the warm hum of the city settling down for rest. And there was dance. Feet tapping against packed earth. Hands lifted in simple gestures, movements swaying with the rhythm of drum and flute. Children imitated their elders, clapping along, twirling in small circles until they fell, giggling into the dust. The body was as much a part of joy as the mind, movement carrying the spirit into lightness. Rest, too, was part of this rhythm. After long days, families gathered on their flat rooftops. The air cooler now, the heat of the sun faded. Mats were spread, lamps flickered, insects hummed in the dark. Above, the stars stretched vast and endless, rivers of light flowing across the sky. Stories were told here under the open night, stories of animals, of journeys, of spirits and gods. Children curled against their mothers, half listening, half drifting into sleep. The murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of crickets, the soft breath of night, all wrapped them in calm. Leisure in the Indus Valley was simple. It did not require palaces or spectacle. It lived in the clatter of beads on a game board, the whistle of a flute, the laughter of children chasing each other down a narrow street. It lived in the quiet glow of lamps, in the stillness of rooftop nights, in the heartbeat of drums under the stars. And in these moments, the city hummed with another rhythm, not the rhythm of trade or labor, but the rhythm of being alive, of savoring time, of joy shared among family and friends. The great cities of the Indus slowly emptied. Streets that once bustled with merchants and children fell still. Brick by brick, walls crumbled, swallowed by earth and time. The rivers shifted, the monsoons grew harsher, and the rhythm that once sustained life here faltered. Yet even as the old world faded, new voices began to rise. To the east, along the wide plains of the Ganges, settlements grew. These were smaller than Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, yet alive with promise. The people who came after the Indus carried with them fragments of memory, tools, stories, ways of shaping the land. And with time, a new civilization began to take root. The Vedic Age. Here life revolved not around great cities, but around open fields and rivers. Villages scattered across the plains, clusters of homes built from wood and thatch, cattle grazed in pastures, central to life and wealth. The riverbanks filled with song, chants passed down from memory, words of praise to the forces of nature. The hymns of the Rig Veda rose in the air, speaking of fire, of rain, of dawn, of the endless sky. The people gathered around sacred fires, offerings of milk and grain cast into the flames. Smoke curled upward, carrying prayers to the heavens. The gods of storm, of wind, of the rising sun were called upon. The ritual fire became the heart of community, its glow uniting families, its sparks carrying both warmth and meaning. Life was simpler, but no less rich. Herds were tended with care, plows cut into soil, and villages thrived through cooperation. Stories were told by wandering singers, their voices carrying news, myth, and memory from place to place. The people had no grand stone cities, but they had song, story, and ritual threads that bound them together. As centuries passed, these villages grew. The Ganges plain, fertile and vast, became a new heart of civilization. Kingdoms emerged. Horses and chariots thundered across fields. Small towns slowly gave way to centers of power, where rulers sought order and protection. The seeds of later India, its languages, its beliefs, its rhythms of life, were sown here. The Indus Valley had ended, but life flowed onward, reshaped, reborn. Where once brick cities stood, now fires glowed in open courtyards, and chants rose into the night. The story of South Asia did not stop. It turned a page. The river of history moved eastward, carrying with it both loss and renewal. And under the same stars, new voices sang to the dawn. The world of the Vedic people was different from the Indus cities. Gone were the long, straight streets lined with brick houses. Gone were the towering granaries and carefully planned drains. Instead, life now unfolded in open landscapes. Wide plains, grasslands, rivers winding through fertile earth. Villages dotted the land. Houses were made of wood, bamboo, and thatch. Smoke drifted from hearths where meals of barley, wheat, and milk were prepared. In the mornings, the sound of cattle echoed across the fields, herds driven out to graze by young boys with sticks. Cows were more than animals here. They were wealth, life itself. A herd could feed a family, provide trade, and sustain rituals. To lose cattle was to lose fortune. At the heart of life was the fire altar. In open courtyards, priests tended sacred flames. Offerings of milk, clarified butter, barley, and soma, a sacred drink, were poured into the fire. The flames leapt upward, sparks drifting into the dark. The people believed their prayers traveled with the smoke, reaching the gods above. Agni, the fire god, was the messenger, carrying words from earth to sky. The Vedic world was alive with gods. Indra, the thunder-wielding warrior who split the clouds and brought rain. Varuna, guardian of cosmic order, watching from the night sky. Surya, the shining sun. Ushas, the goddess of dawn, painted the skies each morning. The hymns of the Rigveda sang of them all. Thousands of verses chanted aloud, carried in memory from generation to generation. These hymns were not written down at first. They lived in the breath and voices of priests, repeated until every sound, every syllable, was perfect. At night, when the stars filled the sky, chants rose in measured tones. The rhythm of the verses, the crackle of the fire, the hum of insects, together they created a soundscape both earthly and divine. Life was both simple and rich. Men guided plows drawn by oxen, cutting furrows into soil softened by rain. Women ground grain on stone slabs, shaped butter from milk, wove cloth on looms of wood. Children learned through play and imitation, watching elders, helping in the fields, or chasing each other barefoot through grass. The villages were smaller than the old Indus cities, but they pulsed with life all the same. Music, too, filled the air. Flutes made from reeds, drums stretched with leather, and songs carried by human voices. Some songs praised the gods, others told stories, and some were simply for joy. At gatherings, people sat in circles, singing together while fires burned bright, casting shadows across the grass. Though they lacked the stone cities of the Indus, the Vedic people carried a different strength. They held within them stories, hymns, and rituals that endured through centuries. While walls and bricks crumbled in silence, their words lived on, carried by memory and voice. And so the story of South Asia entered a new rhythm. A world not of grand cities, but of open skies, sacred fires, and hymns rising into the night. The Vedic villages breathed to a rhythm of earth and sky. Life began with the rising of the sun, when the first rays touched the thatched roofs and fields glistened with dew. The air was filled with the sounds of animals waking, the lowing of cattle, the bleating of goats, the fluttering of birds. Families stirred, women tending the hearth, men preparing for the day's work, children rubbing sleep from their eyes. Cattle were wealth, cattle were life. A family's fortune was measured in how many cows they owned. Milk was churned into butter, mixed into meals, and offered to the sacred fire. Oxen plowed the fields, their heavy hooves pressing into soil. Even the very hymns of the Rigveda spoke of cattle as blessings, symbols of prosperity, sustenance, and divine favor. But life was not only about tending herds. Barley and wheat were cultivated, ground on stone slabs into flour. Women worked patiently, hands moving in steady circles, the sound of grinding like a heartbeat in the courtyard. Bread was baked, porridge was cooked, milk was warmed. Simple meals, yet deeply nourishing. Food that tied the people to both land and livestock. At the heart of every community was ritual. The fire altar stood like a living presence. Priests or Brahmins carefully tended flames, chanting verses as they poured offerings of ghee and grain into the fire. The smoke rose, twisting upward into the sky, a bridge between earth and the divine. Voices recited the hymns of the Rigveda with precision, for every sound mattered. One misplaced word could disturb the sacred rhythm, so memory and discipline shaped the lives of priests. But rituals did not belong to priests alone. Families gathered around fires at dawn and dusk. Fathers whispered prayers. Mothers poured offerings of milk. Children listened, wide-eyed, their first lessons not in writing, but in rhythm, song, and faith. The gods of the Vedic age felt close, woven into every part of life. Indra's thunder was heard in summer storms, his lightning flashing across the darkened sky. Agni, the fire, warmed every home and lit every ritual. The dawn itself was seen as a goddess, Ushas, rising with her soft glow of pink and gold, awakening the world.
Oh, yes.
Every breeze, every river, every spark seemed alive with spirit. Society, too, began to shift. People lived in clans, bound together by family ties. But slowly, new layers formed. Priests who knew the sacred hymns began to stand apart. Warriors, strong and skilled, defended cattle and land, riding in chariots drawn by swift horses. Farmers and herders worked the soil, tended flocks, built homes, and others, artisans, servants, supported the rhythm of village life. It was the beginning of what would later become the Varna system, the first outlines of social order that would shape the subcontinent for centuries. Festivals marked the turning of seasons. When rains came, people rejoiced, singing hymns to Indra, thanking him for breaking open the clouds. At harvest, villages gathered, feasting on bread, milk, and meat, music filling the night air. Fires glowed in circles, drums beat steady rhythms, and stories were told. Stories of gods, of heroes, of battles fought in skies and on earth. Children danced, elders watched with knowing smiles, and time itself seemed to flow like the rivers, steady, eternal. Life in the Vedic world was not the silence of ruins, as in the Indus after its decline. It was the sound of voices chanting in rhythm, of cows lowing in fields, of fire crackling in courtyards, songs echoing under stars. It was a world where memory was stronger than stone, where words carried forward what walls could not. And though their villages might seem fragile, made of wood and thatch, their legacy would endure far longer than the bricks of Harappa. For the hymns, the rituals, the very ideas born here would ripple through centuries, shaping kingdoms, faiths, and cultures still alive today. The Vedic village was more than a cluster of houses. It was a living community, bound by kinship, ritual, and shared rhythm. At its heart was the family. Families were large, often stretching across generations. Grandparents, parents, children, cousins, all living under the same roof or within the same courtyard. The father was seen as the protector, the one who guided the household and tended to cattle and fields. The mother was the hearth keeper, the weaver of cloth, the one who ensured that food and warmth never ceased. But her role was not silent. She too prayed, sang hymns, and in many verses of the Rig Veda, women speak with their own voices, poets, seers, teachers of wisdom. In this world, women could own cattle, take part in rituals, even compose sacred songs. Some of their names echo across time. Lopamudra, Gosha, Gargi, remembered for words carried by fire and voice. Children grew into this rhythm naturally. Boys learned from their fathers how to guide cattle, shape tools, or wield the bow. Girls learned the art of weaving, the preparation of food, the tending of hearths. But all children, no matter their path, absorbed the chants of the Rig Veda, listening to elders, repeating verses until they became second nature, etched into memory like breath itself. Life was not without conflict. Cattle raids were common, for to steal herds was to steal wealth. Warriors, mounted on chariots drawn by swift horses, defended villages, their bows curved like the crescent moon, their arrows tipped with shining metal. Warriors sang hymns to Indra before battle, calling upon his thunderbolt for strength. Victory meant not only wealth, but honor. Stories of bravery told around fires, names remembered in song. Marriage bound families together. Unions were often arranged, but rituals made them sacred. The bride and groom sat near the sacred fire, walking around it, hand in hand, as chants were recited. The fire bore witness to their vows, its flames carrying promises into the night sky. Families feasted, drums beat, songs rose, and new ties of kinship were formed, weaving villages into larger networks. Education was woven into memory, not stone. There were no schools in the sense we know today. Instead, boys who showed promise studied with learned priests sitting at their feet, listening to verses, repeating them aloud until every syllable was flawless. Knowledge was passed mouth to ear, mind to mind, fragile yet enduring, for the discipline of memory was sacred. The spoken word was stronger than writing, for it lived in living voices, unbroken through generations. The natural world shaped everything. The rivers were not only water, but goddesses. The rain was not only weather, but Indra's gift. The dawn was not only light, but Usha's herself, rising in beauty each morning. Every act of life was tied to something larger. Every meal, every prayer, every festival, a reminder that the human world was part of a greater order. Rita, the cosmic balance that sustained all things. And so, while the Indus had given South Asia its great cities of brick and stone, the Vedic world gave it something less tangible, yet more lasting. Words, rituals, ideas, the sound of hymns rising into the night, the glow of sacred fires under starlit skies, the rhythm of a society learning to live not only in walls, but in stories and voices that would never fade. The Vedic villages, once scattered across the plains, slowly drew closer together. Trade increased, roads formed, and leaders began to emerge, not just as warriors or priests, but as rulers of land and people. The chants of the Rig Veda still echoed, but alongside them rose the voices of kings, councils, and new laws. The Ganges plain, wide and fertile, became the heart of change. Here rivers wound like silver threads through fields of grain. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and soon kingdoms formed, each with its own ruler, its own laws, its own way of life. These were the mahaprajjas, the great realms. 16 of them, each distinct, each vying for power, trade, and influence. Names like Kosala, Magadha, Vatsa, Avanti whispered through the land. Kosala, with its capital at Ayodhya, where stories of Rama would later be told. Magadha, rich in iron and elephants, destined to become the seedbed of future empires. Vatsa, known for trade and learning, Vante, straddling important routes between north and south. These kingdoms were no longer just clusters of homes. They were organized, structured, powerful. Rulers now bore titles like Raja or Maharaja, kings of men. They commanded armies, collected taxes, enforced laws. Courts were held, advisors counseled, alliances formed and broken. Yet even in this growing complexity, the old Vedic rituals still glowed in palace courtyards. Sacred fires still burned. Priests still chanted, ensuring that rulers ruled not just by might, but by dharma, the cosmic law, the right way. Cities began to take shape with walls, gates, and markets. Merchants sold grains, cloth, and pottery. Blacksmiths shaped iron tools and weapons. Artisans carved wood, spun thread, painted clay. Trade routes stretched far, to the Himalayas for salt, to the forests for timber, to distant lands for precious stones. The hum of barter and bargaining filled the air, along with the scent of cooking fires and the cries of street vendors. Society grew more complex. The old Varna system, priest, warrior, farmer, servant, became more structured. New classes emerged: merchants, artisans, laborers. Councils of elders sometimes advised rulers, especially in places like Vaji, where clans governed together in what some call the earliest form of republics. Here, rulers were not kings, but elected leaders, and decisions were made through assemblies, a remarkable idea in a world of monarchs. Religion, too, began to shift. The old Vedic gods remained, but new ideas stirred. Thinkers and wanderers questioned the rituals. Some sought truth not in fire and chant, but in silence and reflection. The Upanishads emerged, texts that turned inward, asking, what is the self? What is the soul? What lies beyond life and death? These questions would shape the spiritual path of India for centuries. Amid this ferment of kingdoms and thought, two extraordinary voices would soon rise. Gautama Buddha, born in the realm of the Shakyas, who would walk away from palace life to seek enlightenment. Ahavara, the great teacher of the Jains, who taught of non-violence, truth, and the renunciation of worldly ties. But those stories, luminous and quiet, belong to the next part of the tale. For now, the Mahaprajjas stand like pillars on the plain, each a world unto itself, each shaping the land in its own way. And through their rise, the memory of the Indus fades further, replaced by new cities, new voices, new dreams. Life in the Mahaprajjas was no longer the quiet rhythm of Vedic villages. It was louder, busier, more layered. The air of the cities carried new sounds, hammering from blacksmiths, the chatter of merchants, the creak of carts loaded with grain, the cries of animals driven through narrow streets. Markets were the heartbeat of city life. In the early morning, stalls lined the streets, their awnings shading goods. Merchants laid out baskets of barley, jars of clarified butter, rolls of woven cloth. Jewelry made of beads and copper glinted in the sun. Children darted between sellers, their laughter rising above the noise. Foreign traders sometimes arrived, their speech strange, their clothes unfamiliar, their wares exotic. Spices, stones, perfumes. The houses of the time varied. In villages, homes were still of mud and thatch, simple and earthy. In cities, brick houses appeared, not towering like Harappa's past, but sturdier than before. Some were 2 stories with inner courtyards where families gathered, women cooked, and children played. Oil lamps burned at night, their glow spilling into streets where dogs wandered and guards kept watch. The palace stood apart, often at the center or raised on higher ground. Here the king held court, surrounded by ministers and guards. Petitioners came with disputes over land, cattle, inheritance. Merchants came with gifts, hoping for favor. Ambassadors from other kingdoms bowed low, bearing messages of alliance or warning. The court was not only a place of judgment, it was theater, power on display. In some realms, especially in Vedic, power looked different. Here, councils of clans gathered in great halls, decisions made not by one king, but by many voices. Drums signaled meetings. Men debated, argued, voted. It was a world of early republics, unique in their time, offering a different path than kingship. The people's lives, however, still turned on simpler things. Farmers rose with the sun, plowing fields of rice, barley, and wheat. Oxen dragged heavy wooden plows through damp soil. Irrigation channels cut by hand carried water to crops. Women tended vegetable gardens, spun cotton, milked cows, and ground grain on stone slabs. Meals were humble, flatbread baked on clay griddles, pulses boiled into stews, milk poured fresh into cups. Craftsmen filled the cities, potters spun wheels, shaping vessels both plain and painted. Weavers sat at looms, their fingers flying, producing cloth for local use and distant trade. Smiths worked in firelit workshops, hammering iron into plows, swords, and nails. Their tools built both fields and armies, for the Mahaprajjas were not only places of trade, but of constant war. Armies grew larger than ever before. Kings commanded chariots, cavalry, and elephants, their trumpeting echoing across battlefields. Soldiers carried bows, spears, and swords. Drums beat as they marched. Banners flew in the wind. Wars were fought not only for cattle, but for land, wealth, and control of trade routes. The balance of power shifted constantly. Magadha rose, then Kosala, then Avanti. And through it all, ritual and belief remained close to daily life. Fires still burned, hymns still chanted. But alongside the priests came wandering teachers, men who rejected palaces and markets, who walked barefoot, carrying only begging bowls. They spoke of suffering, of the endless cycle of birth and rebirth, of ways to find peace beyond wealth and war. Their words began to draw followers, farmers, merchants, even princes, restless with the old order. The Mahaprajjas were not yet empires, but they were something new. Worlds where power, trade, and ideas crossed paths. Their streets were filled with life, their courts with ambition, their forests with wandering seekers. It was a time of expansion and questioning, a bridge between the old hymns of the Vedic age and the philosophies that would soon transform the world.
From the baked clay streets of the Indus Valley, where children played by wells and families slept on rooftops under starry skies, to the firelit Vedic villages, where hymns rose to the heavens and warriors rode swift chariots across the plains, to the bustling markets and rising kingdoms of the where kings sat in courts, merchants bartered in streets, and wandering seekers asked deeper questions. South Asia's early story is one of change, of rhythm, of life carried forward like a river. The Indus people left behind bricks, seals, and silent cities. The Vedic world left chants and rituals, voices echoing in memory rather than stone. The mahaprajjas left new ways of ruling, new cities, and the beginnings of philosophies that would spread across the earth. And in time, out of this restless landscape, two voices rose above all others. Gautama Buddha, the prince who gave up luxury to find peace beneath a Bodhi tree. Mahavira, the teacher of Jainism, who showed a path of non-violence and truth. Their footsteps carried through forests and villages, across kingdoms, into the hearts of kings and farmers alike. Their teachings offered answers where old rituals could not. Compassion instead of conquest, reflection instead of endless struggle. A new way forward. The story of these civilizations does not end, but flows. Just as the Indus gave way to the Ganges, just as villages grew into kingdoms, just as kingdoms became empires, each era left its trace. In pottery and prayer, in verse and vision, in cities now silent but never forgotten. And as the night deepens, you can imagine it all. The quiet streets of Harappa under the moon, the crackle of a sacred fire in a Vedic courtyard, the hum of a market in Magadha, voices rising and fading with the breeze, the soft words of a teacher beneath a tree, offering calm to anyone who would listen. Civilizations rise and fall, but their stories remain, like embers glowing in the dark, ready to be remembered, ready to be told. So let the past rest now. The wells are still, the fires have burned low, the kings have gone silent. Only the stars remain, watching as they always have. From Indus to Vedic, to Mahaprajjas, to today. And under those same stars, you too may rest, carried by their light. As the long story of history becomes the quiet rhythm of sleep. History grows quiet now. Let its echoes fade, and let sleep take you gently under the same stars that have always watched above.